But when we finally turn to that passage and we see that Jesus takes them to himself before his ascension, and he lifts his hands over them and blesses them, what we have in this passage is, it is unquestionably the fact that this is the point. At the end of the gospel, this is the whole point of it. So let's turn our attention to Luke, right? That's what we're in after all. We're at the very, very last passage in Luke, after only 9 seasons together. This is my 9th season with you in this text. And we come to this passage, and what I want to say first is that the word blessing actually, and blessed, specifically blessed, happens quite a bit in the Gospel of Luke. You'll remember probably with me, because I think I've mentioned it more recently than 9 years ago, that Elizabeth blesses Mary in chapter 1, when the child inside of Elizabeth jumps, right, at the presence of the Christ child inside of Mary. Elizabeth blesses Mary. Zechariah blesses God when his mouth is loosed and he names his son John. That's also in chapter 1. Simeon blesses God when he takes the Christ child into his arms in the temple. He blesses God, for his eyes have seen the salvation of the Lord that he prepared. A light to lighten the Gentiles, right? The glory of your people Israel. The song of Simeon. Jesus speaks quite a bit about blessing. He teaches people about blessing. In the Sermon on the Mount that he gives, actually it's called the Sermon on the Plain in Luke chapter 6. He talks about God's blessing being for the poor and the hungry, and those who weep, and those who are reviled, those who are cursed, and those who are not offended by Jesus. Jesus takes the loaves and the fish when he feeds the 5,000 in chapter 9, and he blesses them before he gives them out. As you might imagine, I could go on and give you a lot of other examples. But what you would see actually through all of those examples is, oddly enough, Jesus actually never takes his disciples to himself in Luke and blesses them. It's kind of interesting. It's reserved for this very end of the gospel, till this last passage that we just heard Chuck read to us. But when we finally turn to that passage and we see that Jesus takes them to himself before his ascension, and he lifts his hands over them and blesses them, what we have in this passage is, it is unquestionably the fact that this is the point. At the end of the gospel, this is the whole point of it. So let me read it again to you. Okay, Luke chapter 24, verse 50. He led them out as far as Bethany. Lifting up his hands, he blessed them. And while he blessed them, while he's speaking God's favor upon them, he parted from them, was carried up into heaven, and they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy, and were continually in the temple blessing God. All right, think about this, right? Here at the very end of the Gospel of Luke, which beginnings and ends are a very important thing. And actually, it becomes true actually in the second volume in Acts too. The beginning and the end are very key in this movement. But here at the very end of the Gospel of Luke, Luke is intent on us understanding that this is what God is doing. As he leaves them, he is saying, God bless you. I am blessing you. I'm speaking my good favor over you. And what they do, it says, is they rejoice and they worship.